Hello my friends, what I'm going to share with you today is a little bit of history. It shows how the world's changed in the last 100 years in this part of the world, because at this time people didn't seem to have much in the way of rights. Of course, rights bring responsibility usually too, but these folks seem to have a lot of responsibility and not much in the way of rights. It's called Take the Door Off. Take the door off. Less than a decade before World War II, those words struck terror in the hearts of an invalid mother and her daughter. They were unable to do a thing to prevent what was happening. Joseph Smith had come to Aston taking work at one of the local stables and had married local girl Elizabeth, also Smith. She worked in the post office at Aston Tyrol until they were married. Their tied cottage home was in the adjoining village of Aston Upthorpe. Joseph was suffering from wounds earned in the trenches of the First World War. Now arthritis had set in, making work almost impossible. Elizabeth had dropped a heavy weight on her foot as a child and was disabled for life. Now, despite Joseph's war record, they faced eviction from their home by the race-owning Major, who was also the boss. A popular local couple was what they were. Lizzie was well known in the community and had always been obliging and kindly when serving at the post office. One of her more serious duties as postmistress had been breaking the news of Edward VII's death in 1910. She received a phone call at the post office and was charged with telling local notables the sad news that this son of Queen Victoria had died. Leaving work to marry Joseph, she had an anxious time when Joseph was missing, presumed dead, in the horror of the war, but he was later found alive though wounded. I didn't mention when I wrote this, but Lizzie was actually expecting her first child at that time and thought that the husband was dead when she gave birth to that baby, though later he was found. Between the wars, Joseph had become part of village life, being well respected for his knowledge and love of horses. Villagers remembered him saving the day when a friended horse, beyond control, resisted all efforts to load it into its transport for the races. Joseph, working elsewhere, was called. Calmly, he walked up to the distressed animal, speaking gently to it in the way that he only spoke to horses. Soon it was nuzzling him, and he led it up the ramp to travel safely to its destination. On another occasion, he had given testimony to his hatred of cruelty. Walking home from work, he came on a man savagely beating his horse. Joseph confiscated and broke the man's whip. Then he threatened the man as to the consequences if he ever caught him ill-treating a horse again. Joseph was also a fine singer, and some locals, including a well-known racing correspondent, often paid him in ale at the local public house for delivering a requested song. This then was the popular couple now facing eviction from their home. Lots of homes at the time were tied to the job, so you lost the job, you lost the home. As the family had not yet vacated the house, the landowner arrived with 3 of his workers. Joseph was away trying to find somewhere else to live. In the autumn air, the Major's voice barked out the order, "Take the door off!" One man refused, but the second, fearful for his job, took tools to the heavy wooden door and removed it from its hinges. The cold morning air added to the chill running down Elizabeth's spine as she held her 10-year-old daughter, called Amy, close. It was as if all their dignity had been stripped away with the door. Lizzie was too shocked to speak, feeling horror, shame and despair. "Now the back door!" yelled the landlord. Neighbours watched with mixed disbelief and disgust. Mercifully, the Major did not know his property too well. The back door was shared with the next house, and inside each of them had their own back door. The desire for a cool through draught was thwarted to some degree. But invalid Lizzie and 10-year-old Amy struggled to get the scrubbed white wood table on end to fill the cavity left by the removal of the front door. In desperation, they awaited Joseph's return. The villagers of Aston Upthorpe and Aston Tyrol, 2 adjoining villages, were in turmoil as the future of the Smith family was considered. but few of them had either the courage or the power to challenge this wealthy landowner. The Smith's older daughter, Marjorie, the one who had been expected at the time that Joseph was lost in the trenches, was in service at the local squire's home, Mrs. Cross. She worked there as a junior maid. The lady of the house was as disgusted as the poorer people when she heard what had happened. She visited this harsh military landowner and expressed in no uncertain terms the disgust of the community. Where did the Major expect this needy family to go? Half-heartedly, maybe responding to a troubled conscience, who knows, the Major offered them another home. Far from ideal for an invalid, but glad to have a roof over their heads, the family accepted the offer, moving 2 miles out of the village, up a rough track, onto the Berkshire Downs, as the local hills were called. The attached house was used by a shepherd to sleep in at lambing time. A wagon and horses moved the Smiths to their new address. Now, 10-year-old Amy had a long, lonely walk to school. But times were different, and there were no real fears for her safety. Always a nature lover, she enjoyed living in the wilds on the hills, helping the shepherd on occasion, as well as feeding the pheasants for the gamekeeper. Spring and summer sunshine covered the grassland with a carpet of wild flowers, and the views across Berkshire and beyond were a delight to the young girl's eyes. Visiting the area recently, Amy, now near to 80, pointed out the gnarled old apple tree at this still isolated spot that she used to climb. She climbed there and then she read, because there were few playmates at Sheepcot, far away from village life. In her teens, Amy had been able to locate a more suitable home in the nearby village of North Morton, so once again her parents were able to enjoy being at the centre of village life, moving into Cobb's Cottage. But Amy never forgot the vow she made to herself as the Major boomed out his cruel order, "Take the door off!" She remembers her thoughts as clearly as she remembered his voice. "I will never bounce straight to anyone," she said. True to her word, she hadn't. It was assumed by all that she would follow her sister into service, working as a maid in one of the wealthy households. Most village girls from poorer families shared in that kind of employment. The class system was very much in evidence, and it wasn't all as cheery as Downton Abbey seems to be most of the time. Not Amy, though. Seeking employment instead at a coffee factory, she gained a reputation for being prepared to stand up for herself. Also a keen sense of justice she held on to. All this despite basically having quite a timid nature. She's carried that vow never to bow and scrape to anyone right through her life. It stuck with her through World War II, through her married life, and now in her later years. I know, because I've watched much of it. Stable lad Joseph Smith and postal worker Elizabeth Smith were my grandparents, and Amy, the little 10-year-old girl threatened with eviction, was my mother. I wrote that in 1999. My mother died sadly about a decade ago, but it's interesting to think of how times have changed, how really people were at the mercy of others back then, but it's still like that in many parts of the world, and we need to perhaps remember that and think about how much poorer folk need the friendship of those with some influence to help them. I'd like to show you some photographs, my friends. Just hang on 1 minute. The first photograph, this one, is my grandmother. She is the Lizzie Smith who used to be postmistress. This is the two houses joined together. Of course, these days, these houses have been modernised somewhat, although the traditional English thatch is held onto. We can imagine that it wouldn't have been such a grand looking home then. And this one, this is actually the half that the family were being evicted from. And here is my mother, standing by the village sign for the village of Aston Upthorpe, not too many years before her death. Hope you've enjoyed this story, my friends. I've enjoyed sharing it with you. It's a bit of family history, but it's also a bit of history of the times. It shows how much things have changed. It shows what hard lives people had, even though they'd given what was considered to be service to their country, and how the very people that sent them to fight in those awful trenches could so harshly treat them as of no importance just because they were poor. Bye bye for now. Nice to share this with you. Thank you for listening. Bye now.